But my part of that journey or that vision is to build up this particular capability and enable us to enable the product teams to have access to meaningful information. And then as we learn and iterate and perhaps fail along the way, we strengthen the knowledge across the business.
Well, speaking of, sorry, Mark, but thinking about like combining data points, I always had this like grand vision across lines of business at my last employer of creating a user scoring system that would allow us to then look across the person's journey of being a taxpayer at different points in time, but also then make it so that we could use that scoring system to say, okay, once we see the scoring system on the whole change for this group of people, then maybe we need to think about migrating them to our other professional product, whatever the case may be. But I always wanted to try to come up with that sort of a scoring mechanism that brought together qualitative and quantitative in a weighted fashion that could allow us to better understand things, both, from two factors, and then potentially broadcast it across the org using all sorts of data. This idea that like, how many times did a person that, made X amount of money and filed single and had 2 kids, tax stuff, obviously American tax stuff. Sorry, Liselle, but what, if we could create one score that we could then echo back to leadership and say like, okay, their overall score is a 70 or whatever the case may be, but that tells us this, and it's an amalgamation of number of times they called support, number of emails they sent, number of times they failed to log in before they had to reset their password. Like I've always wanted to get to that level, but to your point, it's all these disparate sets of data that we're trying to bring together. But it's really cool what you're talking about, and it could be exciting to watch.
Yeah, well, yeah, we hope. Yeah, I'm an optimist, but actually, we sort of are thinking in a similar way, and we sort of, one of the coins that we're using is a sort of a friction score, and the way I think of it very simply is I'm going to now use a reference I know, London Underground, and I just think of it very simply in that way because if you think of rush hour in the London Underground, all that friction. And if you can imagine visualizing that at the same time across all the tube stations, that's actually what our world is inside our organization with all of the clinical systems that our people are using. That is actually the reality. So if we can create a way to show that to our leadership, but also to our various product teams, it then will help us work out faster. I'm convinced of this. Where do we put the resources and effort in the most? And I think this is why it's quite compelling what we're trying to do, because we're also trying to think about it, not just from a product point of view, but we're also trying to work out how do we, once we've worked out it on the product side, right? How do we then understand that in our business context and the market dynamics of our business, where we are running our operations of trials and things like that? How do we then start to understand that information to be able to predict improvements before rush hour hits, right? That's kind of like how we think about it.
Sounds hard.
Super. It does sound very, very difficult and super.